As a little boy, the hospital's sterile smell permeated the air. He sat near the window, staring at the entry. Shades of gold in the scene. He waited like he always did, day, week, and month, even if the sun was shining on his face. 12-year-old Daniel had been fighting a rare muscular disease since birth, and the majority of his life had been spent in a hospital. However, his biggest struggle wasn't with his illness or the pain, but rather with loneliness. His mother had done everything in her power to support him for years, but his father had abandoned him when times became difficult. Daniel turned to the nurse and asked hesitantly, "Did my dad come today?" The nurse gave him a kind smile, but her eyes were sorrowful. "Perhaps tomorrow, sweetie." Daniel lowered his head, knowing that his father would not arrive, but he still looked at that door every day because he had nothing left to hope for. One day, Robert Downey Jr. arrived, but it wasn't the person he had been waiting for. The hospital director and nurses watched as Robert passed through the hallways, and no one knew why he was there, but he had followed a story he had seen on social media. As he got closer to Daniel's room, his heart grew heavier. A child was waiting for his father to enter, but the door was empty when he entered. Daniel's eyes widened as he realized you were Iron Man. "I'm just Robert today, but from what I've heard, you're the real hero here," the boy whispered. Daniel smiled shyly, but his smile soon turned into something more serious. "If my dad could see me, do you think he'd think I'm a hero too?" Daniel felt his chest tighten. "There's no reason your father wouldn't be proud of you," he said softly. Daniel uttered something that pierced Robert's heart like a knife. "He loved me less than the hospital bills." Daniel shook his head. "No, because he's not here." Robert turned his head away. "If this is love, I wish it felt otherwise." This child had learnt one of the cruelest, yet she merely remained silent. Nevertheless, Daniel gave a little, heartbroken laugh. "Perhaps you should start seeing the love in those who stayed instead of searching for it in those who went," Robert said, shaking his head slightly. For the first time, Daniel felt fully seen when they met eyes, and Robert silently vowed to never again allow this boy to feel alone. After hours of conversation, Daniel wasn't interested in whether Robert was actually Iron Man. Instead, he wanted to know something far more profound, like, "Are you here for me?" Robert's heart ached as he saw the doubt in Daniel's eyes, which seemed to be asking, "Are you just here to do a good deed?" He looked at the weary woman seated in the corner. The woman hesitated for a moment before lifting her eyes to Robert, but no words came out. She took a deep breath, and her voice cracked because when the hospital bills became too much, he decided to leave Robert clenching his fists. Daniel's mother had dark circles under her eyes, messy hair, and the weight of sleepless nights. But when she looked at her son, there was an undeniable love in her eyes. She had fought for years, but life had worn her down. Daniel bit his lip as he gazed at his mother. "Am I just a burden?" he mumbled, and she fiercely shook her head. "Never, don't you ever think that," she said, her eyes welling with tears. Robert had a lump in his throat as Daniel declared that no child should ever have to experience this type of pain, even though Daniel's own tears were streaming down his cheeks, and he still departed, indicating that I wasn't worth staying for. "What your father did doesn't define you," Robert replied firmly, kneeling in front of the boy and taking his small hands in his own. "You weren't the one who left. He was the one who ran away. You were just a kid waiting to be loved." Daniel's little body shook as he sobbed, letting go of tears he had been suppressing for too long. Robert looked at Daniel's mother, who was meant to be strong, but was covering her mouth with her palm as she struggled to contain her own tears. "I've always been strong," she acknowledged, "but sometimes no matter how strong you are, there are responsibilities you can't carry alone." Robert questioned her if she was him, or you, and the woman turned away. Her voice was filled with silent defeat. Robert turned back to face Daniel, who was still staring at him, but now he had a desperate look of hope in his eyes. He didn't need a superhero. All he needed was someone to look at him and say, "I'm here." That's when Robert decided that, for the first time in his life, this boy would actually have a father figure. When Daniel woke up the following morning, he found his hospital room decorated with flowers and a piece of paper with a receipt proving that his medical bills had been fully paid. His mother was sitting at the edge of his bed, holding the document in her trembling hands. Daniel's biological father had abandoned him, but Robert refused to because true family wasn't just about blood, but about the ones who chose to stay. She was crying, but that wasn't the biggest shock when the door opened and Robert entered with a carefully wrapped box. Daniel's eyes glowed with anticipation. Robert grinned and said, "I got you a new Iron Man suit." Daniel's hand trembled as he opened the package, which contained a specially made Iron Man jacket. He ran his fingers over the material, hardly believing it was real. As a child, he had dreamed his father would one day surprise him with an Iron Man costume, but that day had never arrived. And now he was more than just a man, he was a real-life hero. But Robert wasn't done yet. He reached into his pocket, took out a ticket, and handed it to Daniel, saying, kneeling next to him, "Would you like to meet the new team member that the Avengers are welcoming?" Daniel's eyes grew wide with shock. "Are you serious?" Robert smiled. "You are a hero greater than any of them, and heroes never stand by themselves." For years, Daniel had waited for someone to tell him that he mattered and that he wasn't simply a sick boy in a hospital bed. Now that Robert had given him more than just a present, he had given him a sense of identity, worth, and family. Daniel's eyes welled up, but this time it was with joy rather than grief. His mother wiped away her tears and looked at Robert incredulously. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, and Robert gently ruffled Daniel's hair before responding softly, "Because sometimes even heroes need to be saved." That day, Daniel didn't feel like a sick child in a hospital room. Instead, he felt like a superhero. However, Robert wasn't finished yet. He had already spoken with Daniel's mother and helped her find a stable job so that she would never have to fight alone again, paid off the hospital bills, giving her peace of mind. But most importantly, he had given them hope that they had long since lost. After a brief moment of hesitation, Robert smiled warmly at Daniel, his eyes softening as he blinked back emotion. He said that even if I am not your father, I will always be a part of your family. Daniel nodded, his eyes glimmering with joy.